Thank you very much. All right, so welcome to our talk, Greenfield Dreams, Bureaucratic Realities. Before getting down to business, I do want to make a small disclaimer. So this talk distills multiple confidential engagements, and we drew insights from them. So unfortunately, due to the confidentiality, we had to omit and adapt certain details to protect that confidentiality. But we do reflect patterns that we saw across those projects, things we learned, but they also don't describe a single client, product, or platform. We also used some AI to generate some of the images. So this isn't the talk that primarily talks about AI, it uses AI. So in general, some of the details are blurred, but the takeaways and consequences are very much real. Another thing I want to add, these are our experiences. We want to distill them into something meaningful for you. Your mileage will vary, so please look at this talk as a framework. We also applied lots of text. Apologies for that. Please do hang on for the ride. Those who like to read, feel free to read. Those who like to listen, feel free to listen. It comes down to the same thing. Maybe to introduce myself, in a nutshell, I'm Arnaud. I'm the second eccentric Belgian next to the showmaker, and I'm a senior technology architect. I am active in Europe, and usually when you see me, I'm working on complex projects. I also do a lot of sports, mostly CrossFit and duathlon, but I'm the slowest duathlete you will find in this building.
And hello from my side. I'm Rudy. I'm with Accenture now for my 4th year. Also work in the architecture group, and in my free time I like to play tennis, or recently, like already 1 year ago, I also got into CrossFit.
All right, so why do we have this talk? There's multiple reasons for that, we'll get into it. But usually a project looks like that. You have sales, you have analysis, you have build, you test it, you go live, and you have hypercare, and then you have a big party. Some of you are lucky, some of you have a sales phase and you do sprints, and you work agile. But in general, the projects that we've been involved in looked something like this. And no, you're not getting blind, it actually looked a lot like this. And what we mean by this is that we had a lot of phases that overlapped. We had a very short timeline in which we needed to fulfill everything. So we were doing sales, analysis, design, test, build, more sales, more design, rework at the same time, to end with sometimes an uncertain sales phase, because in that timeline we couldn't really wrap everything up. So that is the primary focus around our talk, on how to deal with things that are colliding. So in general, when things collide, there's a lot of effects from that. So you have the rework that is associated with it because you need to go fast. You're already building while you're doing analysis and design, so you're bound to make mistakes. You have design vacuums because everybody's busy on their own island, not necessarily communicating, and that means that not everybody actually understood where we need to go or communicated on what is supposed to happen. And you have the associated morale dips with them because somebody's doing the work and somebody's getting the message that they need to redo the thing. So that kind of sucks. So that's what this talk revolves around. And we have tried to put this into chapters. So the journey we have in store for you today starts with condensed chaos, as everything. Then you have requirements roulette. Then, after we established kind of requirements, we have the square pushed in the triangle hole. Then you have a whole bunch of bureaucracy, followed by a turf war between a bunch of teams, a survival attempt, and then, after a long and windy road, actual delivery. So, Rudy, can you tell us about condensed chaos?
So yeah, the first part of our journey is condensed chaos, and you've seen our face, it's a mess. So usually we have the waterfall, and each phase has its own chaos, effort, and if you do all at the same time, it's not really only adding up, it multiplies and it gets more and more chaos. So what does this mean? So if you do all the phases at the same time, it usually means you're under time pressure. So when you're under time pressure, it means you need to condense the work, you need to do a lot of things in parallel. You might have an inconvenient go-live date because You have time pressure, everything needs to be done. You do everything in parallel. You can't do all the homework, so you might need to start already without having finished the former phases. Communication will be a mess because everyone is under stress and wants to finish their own stuff. And yeah, of course, the last point, like mentioned already a few times, you have the risk of everything happening at the same time. So now you're ready, you want to start. So what happens exactly? One important thing is that when you do everything at the same time is to involve the right skill sets at the right time. So if you already have testing at the start, have someone from testing in there who oversees also from the beginning, when a lot of designs will already change because you're doing it in parallel. Some things relevant for a tester will change or for a developer. So they should also be on board from the same time. You have a lot of stress with the compact timeline. Go with what the developers are confident with. Don't overcomplicate the way you are working. Stick to things which are familiar. Don't try out new things. And of course, last but not least, nice to haves are nice to haves. If you can skip it and if it's not needed, don't do it. So from the dreaming point of view, the middle ground with what you should fix on is have a stable foundation. That shouldn't change so much, but if you have something stable to work from, it helps. And the dream, of course, is fully stable phases, clear waterfall, clear agile way of working. Don't overlap phases because you will struggle.
All right, so then you jump into the requirements roulette, and the image is applicable. So the problem that we really saw here is that, and this stems from multiple situations. This is a client story where a very specific product was chosen, and we were hired to integrate that product in a very specific way. So our client had a client for which they were doing that, so they selected that product, forgot about the product, created mockups that didn't really resemble the product, showed them to their client who was ecstatic. Then they kind of forget about everything again, and then they created requirements that didn't really take both of those into account. So then you get a very, very nice Venn diagram where you have your requirements, your product, your UI mockups, and the reality in between. So this put us in a very tricky situation because there's expectations to manage on multiple levels, and ultimately nobody can be happy in this situation. So for us, it was a very difficult situation because we saw this and we knew that we had to tackle this head on. So we had to make it very clear to the client, and hopefully they would then also make it clear to their client that what they wanted, what they promised, they weren't going to get. So we had to refocus on what they would actually get. And imagine at that time we were already building, right? When we figured that out. So it starts with misalignment on functionality and what it actually has to be, but volatility in situations where you're already sprinting also create confusion, because typically what you see is that in a lot of sectors we sell fixed price, fixed scope, fixed timeline. That means you will do something in a certain amount of time and it is known what you do. When you come back on that, well, then you actually have an agile project, and contractually that is not very compatible. So in this situation, the client was also expecting, they knew what they signed up for, but they were expecting an agile project. And it is difficult to pull them out of that mindset, especially if that changes the scope that you're building. And unfortunately, in this case, we started building things, and as we clarified, as we saw that things were not really matching with the expectations and the reality, we also had to deal with the fact that we had to go to the build team, who was already working very hard, to tell them, sorry guys and girls, we need to go back to the backlog and figure out what we need to do. So in general, our advice here is that these kinds of engagements, they seem like a lot of fun, but there is value in first agreeing on what you will do and making sure that agreement is very, very, very clear. And also take the time to come to that conclusion and not immediately go into building. And then another thing, because this creates a lot of confusion and discussions, we also really, really struggle to keep track of all of our changes and discussions, because in every meeting, imagine you had 8 meetings in a day if we were lucky, we were making macro decisions, micro decisions, and very big decisions. But you're only in those meetings, who's keeping track of those decisions? So ultimately, our decision log was Teams, Outlook, some Confluence pages, and it created more governance issues further down the line. So learn from our mistakes here, don't do that. So ultimately, we went from misalignment on most levels between what the tool could actually do, between the mockups, to real alignment. And here, the middle ground is really painful, and I mean it. There were more than 800 requirements in this specific engagement that were based on legal texts, and most requirements were actual, well, legal text. So you had to sit down, interpret them. So what we did is we put client counterparts in the room and we went through every line in Excel. Is it this what you want? Yes, no. Okay, we can do that, we cannot do that, we can partially fulfill that. So sit down, go through each requirement, even if there's 1,000, you'll thank your future self. That's the middle ground and the dream, and I know this is, well, in most engagements, not really attainable. It is hermetically closed scope. Fixed price, fixed scope is reality. It's fixed. If you want to change it, there is a very long and complex process. Please follow it.
I guess of you many have heard the saying that if you have a hammer, everything will turn into a nail. Or in our case, if you have a square, don't push it in a triangle hole. So, of course, we had the analysis, design, phase in parallel, governing functionality will be hard. So we thought we had the tool, the square, it fulfills the requirement to push it in a triangle. And we had the assumption, yeah, the client chose the right things and it will work out anyway. Be smarter than us and check actually, because when we did it, we were actually already building and we found out, oh, it's not gonna work that well as we expected. Yeah, it was too late to us. So what did it mean? We had to cope with a lot of rework and confusion about the requirements, like, okay, the tool does this. Is it okay for you? Can we meet in the middle ground? So we had a lot of clarifications to go during the building, which is not that great if you have a fixed scope, fixed price nature of a project. So we went also to the vendor, to the product. We asked them, hey, can you help us? And yeah, it also did not quite work well with us, so we had to work on the client expectation management. So this is what you will get. It's not exactly the mockups. It's not exactly how the requirements are stated to some parts, but let's find a way where we can work with and how we can achieve the common goal of making the project work. Ultimately, we managed to get on track. It was a wake-up call from all the sides. It was a struggle to get all the buy-in from all the groups. But you need to figure out in this kind of situation, what is high priority? Where do we really need to go the extra mile to get it done the way it's needed? Or what's not that high priority? What might be able to be pushed back to another phase, or adapted. So it's really important to get right prioritization, which might not be that easy if you have multiple stakeholders involved. So what would be the middle ground here? Figure out what you can adjust and how you can go forward. And the dream, which might not be always possible, is take a step back, reevaluate, maybe there's another tool, another way to make your life easier to get that project going again and fulfill all the requirements.
All right, so when we got that out of the way, unfortunately, we bumped into bureaucracy, a lot of it. Usually, projects have governance. And I say usually because governance is something on its own. And the fact that you have constant change and reworks makes it very difficult to govern, because usually what you're governing against is exactly that. I already spoke about that in the beginning, but if you are constantly misaligned internally and externally, it makes governance even blurrier, and the understanding of governance also very blurry. We might be talking about a car, but are we talking about the same car? Because you have red cars, yellow cars. Some cars have 3 wheels, right? And how do we make use of that car? Just to finish the metaphor, that was very difficult to get through. And if you have not the right amount of governance in unstable times, it leads to very confused people, and it is also not very good for your delivery, and also not very good to manage your client expectations. So it's not only about technology, and that's something that I want to make very clear. Delivery is a skill. Architects, delivery leads contribute to that. It's not only about drawing boxes on a whiteboard or employing AI, right? That's why we as architects help make those decisions and help steer them. And what we saw is that as an architect, you need to be in between that. You need to get those multiple teams that have multiple standards and want you to follow them. You have to put them together somehow. In particular, in one of our engagements, we had to deploy on-premise and on the cloud. And what we saw is that the on-premise team had some very specific requirements, and then the cloud team said, no, you can't do that. That's completely not okay. That's not even industry standard. And the other way around. So the goal was that we wanted to do one deployment, and there you have to find a consensus in the middle ground. What we also saw is that sometimes teams were involved a tiny bit too late or ignored, and if you do that, they do tend to be stepped on their feet, in the sense that they're angry for not being involved, so they're also not inclined to agree with what you have to tell them. So sometimes it's just finding that consensus and also pushing a decision. Sometimes what I just told you is that decision-making is very difficult. It was very easy to find someone to challenge you or to tell you that something is not allowed, but ultimately saying no is easy, but when we needed approval, we didn't find anyone. So we bumped into a lot of people that told us, no, you're not allowed to do that, no, that it's not possible, no, you need to adapt to that. But to find the actual consensus, there was nobody. You also have executives that come in and provide meaningless messages, such as, hey guys, you know, Tomorrowland, their stage burnt down, they built a stage in a weekend, we can do that too, and then disappear as a solution, right? Or security that comes in and says, this is completely insecure against our standards, but you're already 4 months into building your system. So that kind of kills your project momentum, but it's also part of it, finding that consensus, putting those people together, and making sure that that understanding is made mutual. Ooh, went too far. So again, it's not just about technology, it's about humans. You need to buy into their governance structures, you need to align. Frankly, if you see something smelly, the advice I have is to go head on, and not too late, but early. Not to make too many assumptions. We do tend to lose ourselves in assumptions, but in general, assumptions make an ass out of you and me. I stole that, apologize. And also recognize that somebody has to connect the dots, and that the architect is the perfect person or the perfect role to connect those dots in moments of chaos, uncertainty, and misalignment. So instead of having a million opinions and no way forward and no mutual understanding, sometimes as a middle ground, the Belgian compromise, and Belgium, I know, the Belgian compromise is excellent, which is what we went for in this engagement. But the dream is that, and this is something very difficult to chase, but if you can chase it, is that every team, every stakeholder is identified from the beginning and aligned towards the common goal, and not towards a technology choice or certain standards. It helps and makes things a bit easier?
So, well, Arnaud already mentioned a lot of having different departments, groups of people involved, and if you've worked in a bigger project, you usually know the biggest blockers are not technology, it's communication, it's territorial, like different departments have different objectives, different opinions. They love to give their opinions, and they might not be having the interest of the whole project in mind, but just that one of their department and want to make their life easier. And one example we had in one project was with security. They were always present. They worked with it, but they only woke up when they heard pretty late, like, hey, this is inconvenient for us. This is not going to work for us. And then blocked a few things. Then we needed to talk with them a lot. So it's always about communication, with having everyone on board, having a clear structure of communication, find a way where everyone can communicate with each other. And when things get heated, stay calm and try to keep people accountable for their responsibilities. So what's the job of an architect there? It's about streamlining the communication, finding a way how to keep everyone on board, finding maybe a ritual. Yeah, I know, one more meeting, who wants that? But it might be a good way to just have everyone on board, figuring out who is responsible for it, managing scope, expectations. Maybe just a 15 minutes call every day, like, hey, what's the state? Someone needs help, something like a daily. So yeah, give ownership, push a pattern for like the daily. So the client did not go to us with, we need to align a lot. We just set up a call with them in a daily way. Hey, let's talk about it, let's get this done. And one important thing is here on the slides. When you're confused, meet a lot, because you don't have a lot of time. And if someone is confused and works in another way, it's just wasted time and you don't have it. So, yeah, here again, the Belgian compromise. I'm not from Belgium, but finding a compromise is always important. And the most important thing is also try to have everyone not just present, but involved in the process, in the project. So also have them working with you and not just be sitting there. Okay, just another meeting, it's over.
Yes, and to be clear, we're not advocating for more meetings, we're advocating for meaningful meetings. There is a difference. All right, so attempted survival, because I mean, all of this sounded very dramatic. Like I said, it's everything we experience together, but do note that oftentimes everything we discuss happens together, but there is a way to survive it. And in general, I really like House of Cards, so I'm gonna quote Frank Underwood. If you don't like how the table is set, turn over the table. Don't accept that status quo, that you have 20 standards, that nothing is getting done. You need to break through that, and that doesn't happen from the ivory tower. What we see very often is that you have ivory tower architecture. This is the design, deal with it. In these cases, that doesn't work. And it helps to take a step back. What are we trying to do? For example, we had a discussion where they wanted to implement, I cannot mention the tool, but they wanted to implement a tool in between something, which is essentially a useless layer. And after, I think it was 3 hours of discussion, we asked the question, why do you want to do that? And the answer was, well, we want to implement security by obscurity, which is not a valid pattern, and it's something that you can easily, of course, get around. But taking that step back, what do we want to achieve? Helps. Also realize that a perfect state is not always achievable. That's a trap many architects fall in. That's a trap many people fall in general. Sometimes you just want to reach perfection, but reaching perfection is not possible. at least not always, and good enough is something that we should look into achieve, and then perhaps later at a different stage trying to get into that perfect state. Condensing channels, right? Like I said, not more meetings, more efficient meetings, communication channels. Not 20 ways of documenting things on Confluence, actual documentation that people know exists and is simple enough. Clarity between teams. Don't be an island. Don't have the functional team, the design team, the test team on their own islands. Work together. And also ensure that you don't allow others to get into their ivory tower. This is the test plan, please follow it religiously, right? We might want to sometimes change that as well. So what we did to do that is we imposed governance, essentially, and this seems like red tape, but it worked because it decreased a lot of discussions. So we introduced an architecture executive board, which means, okay, I realize you want to change things, but if you want to change something, you need to tell us what you want to change, and you need to tell us what the options are. And then we'll look at the options scientifically by grading them. And that kind of creates a threshold for change, because, well, I actually have to work to request my change, and that makes it a bit more difficult and also makes people more careful when they ask for change. It also quantifies the change because, okay, we want to do A, B, or C. Okay, then research what A, B, or C actually mean. Before we got to that architecture executive board, we also introduced change inquiries. So it's not about just saying that it's wrong, it's about saying what's wrong. And that requires them to quantify why it's wrong, and also helps rationalize changes if you need them. And it also allows to discard a lot of noise, because then you understand what it actually has to be and you can find that middle ground, and sometimes, in half of the cases, figure out that it's actually okay. Daily check-ins are also useful. Don't do check-ins for the sake of doing check-ins, again. But if you have questions about the tool, ask the vendor. The vendor is there, they sold the product, they should answer the questions. Also involve the client, tell them what you're doing, tell them what your challenges are. We also see a tendency of letting misalignment simmer. As sometimes in projects you see that people agree to disagree. But that's not something that is very sustainable for the long term of the project. So my advice is to tackle it head on and be very annoying about it until you actually get a resolution or an option out of it. Maybe it's not your preferred option, but it is an option forward that you can log. It's also important to recognize the expertise of developers. Developers, well, of any team member, testers as well, database architects and so on. They are the boots on the ground. They know how to do things. You don't need to carry everything as an architect. Sometimes you can also ask the developer, hey, we need to time things. What do you prefer? Okay, you prefer Quartz? That's good. Let's go for Quartz, because they have that experience and they can do it. They can do it well. You also need to leave room for politics. Because politics usually simmer a lot, especially in political organizations. Let people do their talking and embrace the key points out of it. Don't join in the politics, but take what you need out of it. And usually when people have said their piece, they're okay with it. And then finally, embody being the connector, the bridge. That's essentially the message, the key message. The architect is the bridge. Not just the person that draws boxes on a whiteboard and then disappears. The architect is the bridge between the delivery lead, the functional team, the client, and so on, to translate that solution into something that is actually tangible. And then lastly, patience, a lot. Don't be afraid of explaining things over. There's a lot of complex things happening at the same time. Don't get angry at people if they ask the same questions. I don't know really how many times did you explain why we have Active Directory, only to figure out that it's a basic requirement that they made?
Way too often.
There you go. So patience, because if you get impatient, then people don't ask their questions anymore.
So we are end of our journey, and maybe let's circle also a bit back to the beginning of, we have a lot of chaos with the project phases. We do a lot of things in parallel, and then you might ask yourself, when did I start doing the delivery? Because you're doing your plan, design, and then when do I actually start? And to be frank, I can't even tell you when we actually did this in that project because everything was so chaotic. You focus on getting things done, so you might not know when the actual start of the delivery happens. So what's important to be there to do as an architect? Be ready to rediscuss everything, have everyone on board. Like Arnaud mentioned in the chapter before, have all the teams there, the functional, devs, testing, everyone there. Yeah, it might be annoying. It's a meeting, but this one was really helpful in our case because we had everyone in there. If someone had a confusion about a requirement, is this requirement clearly defined? Did we build this correctly? We had a quick way to figuring out if we are going in the right direction or not. It also helped us with being a bit more specific. We didn't need to be that specific in that round of our team because we had it regularly and could just talk when the next day we figured something out. So if you have done a more with the communication with the client side where some people were not really then reliable with the communication or just didn't have time for us, you need to be very specific and verbose on what you want to do, how it needs to be done, and make sure that people understand that you're also already doing the delivery and you can't change everything anymore because if you're in the middle in the project, you're already integrated with the tool like the Active Directory. When I'm already built the integration, I shouldn't rediscuss changing the Active Directory, which is one of the foundational things. So the alignment meeting helps with ending up in a misalignment meeting or a misalignment meeting would more be than people are not reacting, or the metaphor with the ivory tower where people are like, okay, that's the testing plan, implement it. Just be honest, have a clear communication with each other, just don't throw things over, rediscuss, double check. And yeah, that's the only slide where we have a technology in there, but here it doesn't even matter which one it is. So here's like an example of how it went when rediscussing something, when everyone is working in parallel in the phases, and the client is not ready yet, and is also is in another phase. So you specify a requirement, you need this because of that, then nothing happens, then they say you have it. Was it really that way you needed it? Because a lot of times happened in between. So yeah, alignment is important, and it's better to align a lot and talk a bit more and have efficient meeting more than just going in the wrong direction and having to redo certain things of the project or the project already.
All right, so before we part ways and do some questions, key takeaways, at least from our experiences, again, your mileage may vary, are these points. So I want to start with direction beats perfection, right? It's okay. Meeting all requirements, picture perfect is difficult. Be honest, communicate, negotiate, fine-tune. Don't let it fester. I've seen projects where it festered. It doesn't get better, ever. And then suddenly you become a recovery project and you've got people breathing in your neck. Don't do it. Accept that there's circumstances where you cannot get to perfection. Then you will have complexity, but you don't need to be confused or confuse anyone. Compressed timelines are one thing, but ultimately doing proper design, having the right alignment is key. If the team that is building the thing doesn't understand what they're building, you're going to end up with something that is useless. Then, boundaries are a gift, use them. And also, unvalidated assumptions are hazards. If you don't set boundaries, that's lethal, because nobody will then respect what the boundary you have in your mind is. So set them. Never let somebody turn your fixed price, fixed scope project agile, because then you are subject to many changes, which probably you are not able to cope with. And if you don't set them, somebody else will put them, and usually they're much further than where you expected them to be. So preempt, fortify that scope, and make safe assumptions and safe dependencies. And preferably, don't deliver with any assumptions at all. Sometimes it's just a question that you can turn into a dependency or into an agreement. Stakeholder management and the illusion of choice is how I like to call it. So every stakeholder has something to say, has something they want. Give them sufficient room to talk about it, but ultimately set a direction. If you must, give them the illusion of choice. The architecture board is one of the ways that you can do that, because you set the options, you grade them, but it also shows that usually there is a difference between the reality and the dream world. And the way you can do that is by scoring all of the changes, all of the options, scoring them for feasibility, for functional match, non-functional match, testability. And what you will usually see is that staying on track is the safest way forward. And then usually people will agree. And then lastly, respecting project stages. No matter how much pressure you're under, don't do everything at the same time. It doesn't work. It just doesn't. It's much cheaper to just do the stages properly than to do everything at the same time and rework 20,000 things. You'll be happier, I promise. So, that's our talk. Not hands-on, not AI. It's about governance. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Arnaud and Rudi. So we have questions here. How can you increase number of meetings within a fixed price project?
Does it matter? I mean, just if you need a meeting, just book the meeting. Why would your fixed price projects set the number of meetings? If you need to ask something, if you want to discuss things structurally, just set the meeting.
How can you convince a client that his desired solution won't achieve his goal?
That's a very tricky question. The architecture board is one way that you can do that, because you can really take the options and show their impact. This is a condensed tool, but you can also inform them about the impact by presenting about it. I find the AAB a very good approach to do that, because it really rubs it in, because you take those options, you give them a bad score, which also shows them that it's not the best way forward.
So once again, what is the reason you use Active Directory?
You want to...
It wasn't the functional requirements of the client in the beginning. And yeah, that's why we choose it and we stuck with it.
And yes, you heard that right. It was in the functional requirements.
And the last question, fixed price sounds like off-shelf, but seems like delivering something existing on paper only. How to get around?
You want to take that one?
Well, fixed price is always a bit tricky. You really need to get the requirements right, and you need to discuss a lot before going into a fixed price. You need to understand what the client wants to build, estimate based on it, and hopefully you estimate it right. It's not agile.
It kind of increases the burden on the sales team, where sales is not just sales, it's also involving your architect and your test team and your A&D team into your sales phase to make sure that everybody is aligned about what you're actually delivering. That, for me, is the key to a successful fixed price, fixed scope project.
So thank you very much for your presentation.